Welcome, Night Country fans. We are back to cover part 3 of season 4 of True Detective. Before we begin, just to let you know, I'm covering every single episode this season. So make sure to like and subscribe and turn on your notifications to get all of these reviews immediately after the episode airs. So, a lot to get into. We're going to start at the end, the big, almost kind of horror scene in the hospital with the surviving Dr. Lund in his final moments, actually conjuring up a spirit to talk to Evangeline. So I wanted to get into that because, True Detective has always kind of played on that whole idea of the supernatural. I said from the beginning that this season has really delved into it more than any other season. I think that ties into them being in Alaska and this in particularly being called the end of the world. And there's a very fine line between realism and the supernatural. So I think Evangeline herself is kind of the key and kind of a conduit into that spirit world. And that's why that spirit, we don't know what spirit it was talking to her, telling her that your mother is waiting for you. Very ominous. What I liked really about it is that this doctor, he looked like a living representation of the corpsicle, as Liz called it. That's sitting there in the skating rink. Just they were posed in these frightful positions, frozen in those positions. But here we see a scientist that's actually living through the horror that isn't dead yet. He's amputated, lost both his legs, lost an arm. He's completely blind, frostbite on his face, complete delirium. But in his delirium, he keeps saying that she was coming for us. She came for us, is actually what he said. So is that delirium from being out in the ice and still being in shock? Or did he really see something supernatural that was out there? Who made them run out there? We still don't know that. That's still all up in the air. But the spirit telling Evangeline that your mother is waiting for you. Remember that Rose told us, I believe in episode 2, that she has 3 rules regarding the supernatural, why ghosts come back, why spirits come back in this region. Number 1, they miss you. Number 2 is that they want to tell you something. And number 3 is they want you to join them. Now, coming in the form of this messed up scientist, it did seem ominous. And I think the first reaction would be to believe that this spirit wants, or the mother wants Evangeline to join her in the underworld. But I don't think it's actually that. Based on what we've seen and the way this episode is directed, I think it was more so that the spirits want to tell Evangeline something. And I think the main thing they want her to know is they want her to rediscover herself. That's what we're seeing with Kaylee Reese's character, is that there's a growth in trying to understand her identity as a Native woman. Multiple times in this episode, one of the things that we see happen over and over with her is people asking her, "Who are you?" or "What's your name?" She gives him her given name, Evangeline Navarro, but that's not her real name. That's not her native name. That's not her Nubiak name. I think that's how they pronounce it. And one of the characters, Oliver, blatantly tells her, "You must have forgot. You forgot your identity." And that's always something that's been hung up in her because she told Kavik that before my mother passed away, or before she was killed, she didn't tell me what my native name was. So because of that, she does not have her full identity. She's basically a living ghost, unlike the specters we've been seeing around these last few episodes. So I really think her mother and these other spirits, these other little things that are happening to her, is really that spiritual world trying to connect with her so Evangeline can find herself and find her true identity. And why is that so important? If she can find her true identity, that I think is going to be key to solving this case, particularly Annie K's case, not really the scientist, even though it's tied in, but really solving Annie's murder and giving her the peace that she deserves. So that's the big journey we're going to be on for the next 5 episodes, is really um, Evangeline getting knowledge of self and understanding of who she is as a Native woman. So big journey that she's on. I'm really liking that Kaylee Reese's character, Evangeline, is taking more of a center stage at this point. I said in my last recap that I thought Liz was kind of overshadowing her a little bit, but now it's kind of flipped. Now we're getting more of Evangeline and her story and her background. So I wonder if we're going to get some more flashback scenes regarding her war experience. Because you remember the first time we got that flashback, she was being whispered to by a soldier with half a head. and we still don't know what that soldier said to her. She had one flashback where she was there for a second, but that soldier wasn't there anymore. So I'm really wondering how much more are we going to get of her background and why it's made her this way. One other thing that stood out to me as far as Evangeline and her process is when she was going back and forth with Liz in the car. She told Liz that she prayed, and Liz laughed at her like, what do you mean you pray? Do you sit down there and do you ask, you know, for things, or you're praying for things? And that's that really Judeo-Christian kind of motif, is that if you pray, you're always asking for stuff from God. And yeah, Evangeline, I think, kind of blew her mind for a bit, telling her that no, I just sit there and listen. I listen to what the will of the universe, God, whatever belief system you have. I try and tap into that and decide or hear what it wants from me, which is very different from what we normally experience in Judeo-Christian society. So that right there already shows you how her thinking is so different, and why she's tapped into the spiritual world here in Ennis, even though she can't make sense of it completely because she's still trying to discover her identity. So really interested to see where things go with Evangeline in these next couple episodes, particularly with her self identity and how that ties into Annie K. The next thing I want to go into is the other important, the actual final scene. We got to see Annie K's death, or at least the majority of it. Very shocking that it was captured on her phone. So the big question is, where was she? The directorial style that Issa Lopez incorporated here, I got a little bit of a Blair Witch vibe, the way she was going around and had the camera on her. And she said that she found something, but we don't know what it is. Now, as far as where she was, at first I thought the freezer, but then I had to correct myself because there's no freezer that is that big. Um, so it looked like there was ice above her though. So she had to be underground somewhere, underground tunnels. I'm thinking it has to be something revolving around the scientists and the experiments that they were doing. One of the key things that tipped me off to that, if you look at the very last scene when she's yanked off camera by somebody or something, you see, it looks like a skeletal outline. And the reason why I caught that is it reminded me of I'm a Godzilla fan. Uh, the King of Monsters movie that came out a few years ago, the King Ghidorah character, it was frozen in ice, and it has those long hydra heads, and they were in a spiral encased in ice. And that's exactly what that looked like. It looked like some type of dinosaur stuck in the ice, or a tail, or if that were a head. But that ties into kind of the speculations that we've had with the scientists and what they were doing out there, is that they were trying to, I think, get DNA, ancient DNA, and all that, and trying to splice it to cure cancer and other modern diseases. So she discovered something down there that probably wasn't that, but something a little more nefarious, and probably something that ties into her life's work. When we first see her in this episode, she's having to hold Evangeline off because she's trying to help a Native woman give birth. So that indicates right there that the women there weren't being taken care of, that they had no resources to give healthy births. So without Annie being there, you have to think, well, number one, you have to think how many children she saved from her work being there. And then after she killed, how many children have we lost because we lost such a prominent figure like Annie K and all the work that she was doing. So to me, she had to have discovered something there that was affecting the water supply, slowly killing the native population there. And that's why she was silenced. I don't think it was anything supernatural that grabbed her. I don't think it was the polar bear or any ghost. I really think she was discovered in there by people who did not want what she found out to get exposed, and they killed her right then and there. Um, I don't know if it was a scientist, whether it was possibly just random goons off screen working for the mining company. That's the big thing that we'll have to see played out over the next 5 episodes. But I do think what we saw lends credence to Evangeline's theory that it's a conspiracy, that obviously Annie was an activist. She was an activist against the mining that populated, or that gave income to half the town, that made her person non grata, and someone affiliated with that side, probably multiple people, being that she was stabbed over 30 times, killed her. That's the simplest explanation, and that's the only one that makes sense to me. Now, as far as who actually did the deed, We have to see if those people have been revealed yet, but I am certain that our boy Hank is involved in the cover up some type of way. We saw the big reveal also happen that the hairdresser told or called in and told Hank about the information that she knew about Oliver and Clark and them dating and all that. And he chose to keep all that information to himself. And then we also know from the first episode that he kept Annie K's file in his house to keep it away from everyone. So he's tied in some type of way. I still don't think he's smart enough to be a mastermind, but he's definitely a cog in the machine that's a part of the cover up and that's trying to sabotage the investigation that's going on. So at some point, he needs to go. If that go means getting taken off the case or being killed by Evangeline or someone else, he has to get out of the picture because as long as he's involved, he's going to stifle the investigation at every single stage. So keep an eye on Hank. I saw Hank from the first episode that something wasn't right with him, and we need to keep an eye on him. And that puts Pete in a bad situation. Pete is probably the one I feel the most sympathy for him and his fiance because he's being emotionally manipulated in two different fronts by the two people that are his parental figures. His real father obviously is manipulating him and his emotions and playing on the fact that well we're blood, everyone else is outsiders, that whole issue. And then the other issue with Liz, who he looks at as a mother figure, she just looks at him as a means to an end. She doesn't have any boundaries regarding his personal time. And it's very egregious because we have getting the indication that she lost a son. So you would think that she would be more sympathetic with the time that he needs to spend with his young son. And she completely disregards it at every single turn and every single time. And it's impacting Pete's relationship now. It's really deteriorating it, to the point where she's not even happy when he comes home now because he's spending so little time with her and leaving the burden on her to not only raise their son, but she's also trying to get through nursing school at the same time. So he's not pulling his weight. And there was a funny little quip when Hank said, you're pulling this Mrs. Robinson routine on my son, which caused her to throw the coffee in his face. And I thought that was especially funny because Pete, being a young guy, he has no idea about The Graduate and the whole history with that movie. It's kind of good that he doesn't, because he might have been really insulted if he actually knew the reference. But that made me feel very old, him not having any idea about The Graduate. But that was the kind of the one funny scene that we had in this entire episode. So Pete is going to have to make a decision at some point, put his foot down with Liz and his father to really save his relationship. You know, that's where it's going to come down to because we're already at this point at episode part 3. We can imagine how it's going to be by part 5 or 6 if it keeps going the way it's been going. Uh, the other thing that stood out to me is, and this was the one downside with this episode, the Wheeler case, the flashback case where Liz, Jodie Foster's character, was telling Pete about why she and Evangeline ended up breaking up in their relationship. The reason why I felt this was a down point is that they're leaning with this situation a little too heavily into what we saw in the first season. It's almost a carbon copy of the whole cover up of a case because more than likely it seems like either Evangeline or Liz shot this abuser in his house that killed his wife, and that was a cover up, and that cover up caused a break in their relationship. And you saw that in the first season where it wasn't in a domestic abuser, but there was that shootout that they had that they fabricated in order to kill that guy in cold blood. So I like that they leaned into the first season with the spiral and that type of connection. I talked about Carcosa and how that ties into Ennis. They should have left it at that. You don't want the cases that actually mirror almost completely what's happening now. So I think I could have done without the Wheeler situation. They could have left that out and just continued on with everything they've been building this season. So we're going to see probably in the next 2 or 3 episodes, one of them shoot the abuser in the head, and then that goes into further their deterioration in their relationship by them having this secret between each other. Um, the next thing I wanted to touch on would be Leia. Leia being Liz's daughter. I like that they're really not abandoning the friction that they're having with Leia being trying to get into her native roots and Liz fighting against it. And we finally got some more insight about why that makes Liz so afraid. Before I kind of looked at it from a surface level, Liz not being a native woman, being white from her background, that she just didn't understand the native population and wanted Leia to just assimilate and have an easier life, quote unquote. But it's deeper than that. I think, and we got this kind of driven home in the final scenes they had together. Really, Liz's motivation is fear. She's fearful of Leia going down the same route that Annie K did. She said to Leia, "Don't you know what happens to people who take up stuff like this?" So that's where the fear comes from. She's seeing too much of Annie K's spirit in Leia, and that's why she's trying to stifle it. But at the same time, you're erasing Leia's identity. And if you do that to her, that's going to make her a specter or a ghost in her own community. Same thing that we see going on with Evangeline, not knowing her name, not knowing her identity. She's always kind of like an outsider to a degree. People want to trust her as a Native woman. We see in these episodes when they approached Oliver in the Nomad camp, just her being a Native woman talking about Evangeline, that got her in the door, but she couldn't get that complete trust because she doesn't know her history. And that's the same route that Leia is going to be going down if Liz continues to just intervene and now allow her to embrace her identity. So there's a lot that we're going to be seeing over these next 5 episodes. One thing I forgot. Going back to Annie K and the last scene where she's pulled away, when I told you about that, it looks like a dinosaur encased in ice. One thing I noticed, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that frozen creature, that looks like a spiral to me. And if you recall in this episode with Annie K, her hairdresser asked her, where did this symbol come from? And according to the hairdresser, Annie used to dream of this symbol. And when she finally got it tattooed on her, the dream stopped. So was this image in her mind like her destiny, like she was always meant to pass away in this fashion, right below the actual spiral symbol? That's why it has so much symbolism. It has to get fleshed out a little bit more because at the same time, Clark, who's still missing, he had the symbol tattooed on him as well. So what symbolism does it hold for him in this situation? So, and also Rose, if you recall, I believe in the last episode, episode 2 or part 2, when she was approached about the spiral symbol from Evangeline, Evangeline told her, oh no, Rose told Evangeline that it's a very ancient symbol, but didn't delve into what that really meant. So is that just simply, goes back to the ancient animals that are here? So a lot more to flesh out over these next 5 episodes. We shall see, but things are going pretty good. I'm kind of on the boat that Annie K's death is a conspiracy from the mind people. And that's kind of going to be the end goal or the ending plot is where I see this going. But let me know what you think. Do you think I'm off base? Where are you at with True Detective? Are you enjoying the supernatural elements, the higher supernatural elements to me than what we've seen in previous seasons, or do you want them to dial it back a little bit? But I'll be back next week to cover part 4 of Night Country. In the meantime, make sure you like and subscribe and turn on your notifications to get that next review coming next week. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday night.